Let's pull on today's wonder thread, the Milgram experiment, one of the most famous, disturbing and misunderstood psychology studies ever conducted. Before we get into it, be honest with yourself. Most of us like to believe we would refuse. We imagine ourselves standing up, walking out and saying, "No, this is wrong." In the early 1960s, psychologist Stanley Milgram wanted to understand obedience, not just rule following, not politeness. Obedience when authority asks you to violate your conscience. Would ordinary people harm another human being if an authority figure told them to keep going? Milgram's work came after World War II and the trial of Nazi officer Adolf Eichmann. A haunting question was hanging in the air. Were people who committed atrocities uniquely evil, or can ordinary people be pressured into doing terrible things? Volunteers arrived believing they were part of a study on learning and memory. They were told punishment might help people learn better. The experiment had an experimenter, a teacher and a learner. But here's the catch. Only the teacher was the real participant. The learner was secretly working with the experiment. The participant didn't know that. They believed this person was another volunteer. They drew slips of paper to decide who would be teacher and who would be learner. But both slips said teacher, so the real participant always ended up in the role Milgram needed. The teacher sat in front of a shock generator with switches labeled from mild shock all the way up to 450 volts. No real shocks were delivered, but the participant believed they were real. That belief is what made the experiment so psychologically intense. The teacher read word pairs to the learner. Every time the learner gave a wrong answer, the teacher was instructed to administer a stronger shock. At first it seemed uncomfortable. Then the learner started complaining. Then he mentioned heart trouble. Then he screamed. Eventually he went silent. That silence is one of the creepiest parts. The participant had to decide, does silence mean he's okay, or does silence mean something is very wrong? The experimenter didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply gave firm, scripted prompts like, "Please continue," and "The experiment requires that you continue." This wasn't obedience through violence. It was obedience through calm authority, institutional trust, and the pressure of just following the procedure. Before the study, many people expected very few participants to go all the way. The assumption was that most people would stop once the learner seemed seriously distressed. In the most famous version, 65% of participants continued to the maximum, 450 volts. Every participant went at least to 300 volts. That's the lazy interpretation. Milgram did not prove that most people are monsters. He showed that normal people can do harmful things under the right pressure. Obedience depended on the situation, where the experiment happened, how close the learner was, how legitimate the authority seemed, and whether other people resisted all changed the results. When the teacher and learner were in the same room, obedience dropped. When the teacher had to physically place the learner's hand on a shock plate, obedience dropped even more, to about 30%. That is one of the most important lessons. The farther we are from someone's pain, the easier it becomes to rationalize what we're doing. At Yale, obedience was higher. When the study was moved to a less prestigious office setting in Bridgeport, Connecticut, obedience dropped to around 47–48%. Authority feels stronger when it comes wrapped in prestige. The experimenter's role mattered. He represented science, expertise, and legitimacy. People weren't just obeying a person, they were obeying what that person symbolized. Milgram described something called the agentic state. That's when a person begins to see themselves as an instrument carrying out someone else's wishes, instead of as a responsible moral actor. That sentence is one of the most dangerous in human history. It allows people to separate their actions from their conscience. Many participants were visibly distressed. They sweated, trembled, laughed nervously, questioned the experiment, or begged for reassurance. They weren't calm villains. They were people under moral strain. Because the problem wasn't that they felt nothing. The problem was that feeling bad did not always make them stop. A person can feel guilty and still comply. A person can know something feels wrong and still continue. That is the part we need to pay attention to. And if this is making you uncomfortable, stay with me. Because the most important part of this experiment is not the shocks. It's what the variations reveal about how we actually resist authority. Follow Wonder Thread if you like deep dives into the strange side of human behavior. In one variation, when other teachers refused to continue, obedience dropped sharply. Seeing someone else say no made it easier for participants to say no too. That matters. Disobedience is not just personal bravery. Sometimes it gives other people permission to find their own backbone. The Milgram Experiment is famous, but it is not above criticism. In fact, its ethics are one reason research rules changed. Participants were deceived about the purpose of the study, the shocks, and the learner's role. Deception is sometimes used in psychology, but this level of deception became highly controversial. Participants experienced serious emotional stress. Some believed they might be badly hurting another person. Critics argued the experiment should have stopped when participants became visibly distressed. The experimenter kept prompting them to continue. So even though they technically could leave, the pressure made withdrawal psychologically difficult. A study like Milgram's original version would face major ethical barriers today. Modern research requires stronger informed consent, clearer withdrawal rights, risk limits, and debriefing. Some people hear the criticisms and think, okay, so the study means nothing. That's not fair either. The exact numbers can be debated, but the pattern is still important. Authority changes behavior. The lesson is, people are more situational than they think. Our behavior is shaped by pressure, setting, hierarchy, distance, and whether anyone else is brave enough to resist. The better question is, what systems, habits, and people help me stop obeying when something feels wrong? Name the harm out loud. Ask who is responsible. Slow the process down. Look for allies. Refuse vague language like procedure when real people are being hurt. When harm is abstract, hidden, or far away, we are more likely to tolerate it. That applies to workplaces, schools, governments, online mobs, and even family systems. Authority itself is not the enemy. We need teachers, doctors, leaders, experts, and systems. The danger begins when authority becomes immune from questioning. Because it asks something most people do not want to ask: how much of my morality depends on the room I'm standing in? Maybe the scariest part of Milgram's experiment is not that people obeyed. It's that many obeyed while visibly distressed, which means conscience is not enough. You have to practice refusal before the moment arrives.